Hi, welcome back to Follet, the video novel. Today's snippet, as you might have expected, is not safe for work children. Nope. Maybe about 5 paragraphs are, but the rest is definitely not. Don't even think about sharing with people that shouldn't see this stuff. But you're a responsible adult, so I'm leaving it in your capable hands. Yeah, buddy. In addition, you really should buy a copy of this book. I know that my presentation in video is tremendous. I hardly make any mistakes and I don't stammer much anymore. But having the book and letting you see what happens in your mind is beyond price. Luckily for you, it's a relatively cheap purchase at Amazon.com, and I'll put the link in the comments underneath this post, especially for you. So remember, don't share this with people who are young or a little stodgy. They won't appreciate it. Nope. It's just not right. Anyway, we're going to do the third part of chapter 16 today. I hope you enjoy it. Back to Clarksville, Mississippi. Here we go. The man introduced them. Ruthie, this is Robert Johnson. Robert, this is Ruth. They shook hands and let their hands hold each other a second longer than they should have, but not nearly as long as they both wanted. Follet said, "Miss Ruth, after playing this set, I could really use a breath of air. Would you like to join me?" Ruth's eyes sparkled, and she nodded. Follet turned and walked out the back door, Ruth following him. Behind the store was a great pile of wood for the wood stove in the winter, a fenced-off area with some quietly snorting hogs, and a little unpainted shed with a padlock on its door. Follet took Ruth's hand and led her behind the shed. Ruth leaned against the shed and studied Follet. Follet moved closer to her, close enough to feel her breath on his skin, but not touching. They stood like that for a minute. It seemed an hour. Ruth whispered Robert, and threw her arms around Follet, pulling him hard against her. She kissed him at first, with her mouth closed, her soft lips pressing against his in the most urgent manner, burning for him, and then opening and closing, nibbling at his lips, leading him to the place she wanted to be. Follet opened his mouth in his kiss, and Ruth's tongue darted to flicker at his lips and then retreat, luring him. Follet pushed his body against hers, her back against the boards of the shed, and her soft breasts pressed against his chest. Follet pushed his right leg between hers, parting her legs just enough to remind her where they were headed. He reached to his neck with his left hand and took Ruth's right forearm to his grasp, moving her arm up over his head and holding it there, his fingers wrapped around her wrist. They kissed, their passion taking over their sense. Follet took Ruth's other arm and placed it with her right and held her wrists together with the fingers of his left hand. He moved his right hand down to touch her neck and down to softly squeeze her left breast through the fabric of her dress. He could feel her hard nipple through the fabric, and she moaned in pleasure. Follet let his hand leave her breast and move lower across her belly and down to where Ruth gyrated against Follet's thigh. He moved his leg to give his hand room to pull the fabric of her dress up and then slip between her legs. He stroked his fingers under the fleshy mound and let his middle and index fingers slide back past her clitoris, petting her fleshy lips and then sticking his middle finger in the mouth of her vagina and rubbing her there, letting only his fingertip enter her, and then moved back, forward, covered in her juice, to rub in tiny circles, clockwise and then anti-clockwise, the little fleshy nub in its fleshy hood. Ruth responded to Follet's attentions with her own invitation, sucking his tongue into her mouth. Follet was too much a gentleman to refuse. He let go of her wrists, and her hands fell to her sides, almost limp, awaiting him. Follet put his hands to Ruth's face and there to kiss her. And then Follet moved his hands down to her shoulders and kissed her again. Ruth moved her hands to the fly of Follet's pants. She unbuttoned the fly, moved up and unbuttoned his pants, and unfastened his belt. His pants fell to the ground. Ruth placed both of her hands at Follet's hips and slid his boxer briefs down to let her hold his penis. With her touch, he began to harden. They kissed as Ruth stroked Follet's cock. When Follet could bear it no more, he broke their kiss and reached down to take Ruth's busy hands. He brought them up to his lips and kissed each finger and then her palms. He let her hands go and took her by the shoulders again and turned her around to face away from him. Follet pushed her torso so that Ruth's chest was pushed up against the rough wood of the shed, her head turned to the right. Follet reached down and pulled her red dress up over her hips and reached down to position her legs spread apart. He then placed one hand on each of her hips and pulled them back toward him. With her beautiful ass thrust back toward him, Follet reached down to take his cock in his left hand. He guided it between her legs and pushed forward so that the head of his cock slipped over her slippery lips, now coated with her juices. He maneuvered his dick so that the soft head of his penis rubbed gently but adamantly at her clit. Again and again he drove against her before he moved his hardness away and back to the wetness of her pussy. He dipped the head of his cock just inside her to wet himself and then glided back to touch the tip of his penis to the tight ring of muscle guarding her anus. Follet rubbed at the sensitive spot and prodded her there before he moved back to enter her pussy. Follet bent his knees just a little to guide himself into Ruth. He moved slowly into her, a little at a time. And when Ruth gasped a small breath of surprise, Follet paused and withdrew just the teeniest little bit before resuming the progress toward Ruth's epiphany. As he moved deeper and deeper into her warm wetness, Follet could feel Ruth relax and open herself more and more to his advance. She moved her legs a little farther apart and swiveled her hips to ease his filling of her. Follet replied by moving his hips to thrust even further into her. Follet pushed into Ruth, increasing his tempo. When he paused at the deepest part of her, he could feel the muscles inside her clutching at him in a throbbing rhythm. This new sensation brought him to his climax. And as he emptied himself into her, he sagged against Ruth, and she made a sound that was half a moan and half a sigh. Follet pulled out of her and turned her around. Her dress fell back down, but he knelt in front of her and lifted her dress so that he could touch the soft hair at her pubis. "Hold this," he said, handing Ruth the fabric of the front of her dress. She held the dress, and Follet moved his face close to her. "Spread your legs a little, baby," he told her. She did, and Follet saw that she was wet from his cum. "You can squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down your leg," he laughed to himself. Then Follet placed his lips at the muscle of her inner thigh, just below and to the left of her furry moans. He sucked for a minute and removed his mouth. He had left her a bruise that she would have for a week or so after the dream was over. He liked to think that she was now marked as his, just a little remembrance. He stood up, pulled up his pants, put himself back in order. Ruth did the same, and her outfit now reflected the glow in her cheeks. Follet moved to Ruth and kissed her again, softly, slowly, the kind of kiss that's often given at parting, but that should be given just as often when lovers meet. Ruth winked, turned, and walked back around the shed into the juke. Follet waited a minute and then followed her. There was a mason jar of hooch sitting on the nail keg. Even though Robert Johnson had forgotten, Follet knew never to drink out of a bottle that he hadn't seen opened. And just as he sat down and began to play, while I followed her to the station with a suitcase in my hand, the dream began to fade. And Follet stood next to Ruth's bed. The sheets and covers had been thrown around in her dream. She was sleeping on her back, her right leg straight, and her left leg bent at the knee, the fingers of her right hand thrust up into her second knuckle into the waistband of the black silk sleep shorts. She wore a peaceful expression on her face, and just the hint of a crooked smile. Follet smiled back at her, turned and walked out of the bedroom door and then down the stairs and out the front door.